Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, more than 12 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance. But with aid agencies struggling for funds, where will the money come from? So, as we follow the Syrian crisis, there's two things going on. We have the political situation, we have the humanitarian situation. Focusing on the humanitarian situation with Omar Badar this week, Malika Bilal is out. So what are you seeing online? How is our community responding?
You know, part of the problem more generally is the fact that the humanitarian situation, as grave as it is, seems to be buried under the political situation, with people constantly arguing about who's to blame or what should have been done.
Right.
And sadly, it's actually reflected in our online community as well to some extent. In response to tweets that we sent specifically about the humanitarian situation, we got responses like this. Guylian here says, it would have been a lot easier if we had simply sent Assad to The Hague in the first place. And you have Rebel Agenda tweeting in saying, toppling another dictator probably isn't the answer, but those funding rebels have started the war and are the main reason behind the deaths. But that's an entirely separate conversation. We're trying to focus on the humanitarian situation and what ideas you might have about solving it. You can tweet us using the hashtag that you see right here, AJStream, and we'll get to those tweets during the show.
Now with us in the studio we have Hazami Bamada, and Hazami is a public affairs consultant and social entrepreneur. Hazami, it's great to have you back here in the stream.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we'll hear more from you in just a minute.
Thank you.
I am Yusuf Al-Khoui and I'm a director for Center for Academic Shia Studies, and I'm in the stream.
Syria's civil war has resulted in the largest displacement of people since the Second World War. More than 7.5 million Syrians have been internally displaced by the violence, and over 3 million fled the country. And as the conflict nears its fourth year, the need for help has never been greater. Now, the UN says that it will need close to $8 billion to fund its Syria humanitarian operations. But where will that money come from? Aid agencies have been running out of cash for this year's operations. The World Food Programme had to suspend food assistance to Syrian refugees due to the lack of funding. And now with some new contributions, the WFP can continue to feed people until the beginning of January. So today we're going to look into the challenge of supporting the 12 million Syrians in need of humanitarian assistance. So to help us talk about this, we're also joined by Lina Sergi. She's Lina Sergi Attar. She's co-founder of the Karam Foundation, and that is a humanitarian aid organization working with Syrians. Sami Aldous is a Syrian refugee living in the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan. He's been living there for the last 2 years. And Melissa Fleming is Chief of Communications and spokeswoman at the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. So it's good to have you all here in the stream, everybody. Let's start with Sami. Yeah. Sami, you're Syrian, you're sitting in a refugee camp. What is life like for you right now?
I'm totally stuck at the moment. You know, personally, looking at the whole picture, looking at Syria, looking at the regime, looking at the rebels, and the whole thing is not getting over, or there's no reasonable solution for them. All I'm trying to do now is get a scholarship and start out a new life. Yeah.
So let me bring in Lina here. Lina, you're back and forth to Syria quite a bit. What are the stories that you're hearing? What's the situation like?
The situation, we work mostly on the Turkish-Syrian border and a lot with the children, refugee children and teens. And I've seen people like Sami in my last trip 2 weeks ago, many teenagers and young Syrians who have dreams and have potential of the potential of millions of teens around the world. They want to become something. They want to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, build a future for themselves. But their realities are very, very bleak, and their opportunities are very limited, and time is running out on these kids that are running towards, they want to run their own lives and take ownership of their lives. And that is the cause of having this conflict having gone on for so long, that the refugees are learning to be long-term refugees, and we're learning as a small aid organization how to continue to contribute to the Syrian humanitarian crisis in a meaningful way that's sustainable and helps people rebuild lives.
Right, so it's connecting with people's stories that makes sense to a lot of people out there who go, how can we help? So Sami, you just said you're right as Lina was speaking. What did you mean by that?
You know, I'm single. My whole family is not in the camp. They're not in Jordan. But for me as a single guy, all I think now is build up a new life. I want to go to college. I want to study. I want to have a decent life that I can't do now, that I can't have now. Not here in the camp, not back in Syria. Like, all I'm trying to do now is get an opportunity to go somewhere and start a new life. But on the other hand, if we're talking about families, like if I was a married guy and I have a family, and you know the Arabic culture is much different from the the Western one, I would be just looking for a job and staying in the camp, or I might be thinking for leaving Jordan and going to another place to like resettle and build a new life. All I will be thinking of is just to start over.
All right. So
this is
Sammy?
Exactly what we've been seeing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, everything we've been seeing on our last trip. I mean, we actually had a very incredible moment with our mentors. We take with us international mentors and people who are Syrian as mentors for schools in on the Turkish border. And we actually had a situation where a young family, no children, they are Syrian refugees from Aleppo, and they'd come from Istanbul to the border to help us, and they are relocating to Sweden. And it was a very bittersweet moment. I'll never forget it in my life when the husband told his young wife at the border when we went to visit Bab el Hawa to just see a glimpse of Syria, because we can't enter the country. He told her, our visa just came in and we're leaving Turkey and we're going to Sweden. And she was sobbing because it was just for her a moment where she was on the border and they are going towards a better life and stability, but she realized that she might never ever be that close to Syria again. And we witnessed that firsthand. And that was from a mentor who came and set up our computer lab for the kids. So the crisis, you know, is really layered, and it affects everybody involved, not just the kids, not just even the refugees in need, even the ones that have some kind of stability are their lives are in complete turmoil.
See, where Sammy is sitting, it looks like, Sammy, you've got the best Skype there. It looks quite nice in the background, but you have to explain to me where you are as to why we've got such a good Skype connection.
Well, I am in Zaatari camp. I'm actually in one of Mercy Corps' facilities.
Right.
Mercy
Okay.
Corps is an organization, working with, in child protection.
Sure. I'm going to go to one of your fellow refugees, and he's called Abdul Razak Harari. He spoke to us just in the last 24 hours or so. He's sitting in the dark. The electricity is out. He's using extra sort of generator power, and he's sitting in a caravan, and he's telling us about his experience.
I'm doing so as well. I'm using a generator.
Right. Okay. So we had to use a generator to get this from Abdul Razak Harari. Have a listen to what's happening in camps like Zaatari.
العلاج والمدارس حاليا متوفر داخل المخيم.
Schooling and healthcare are available inside the camps, and it's not bad, to be honest. But we have bigger problems with long-term illnesses like cancer and meningitis. Even paralysis among children, which largely disappeared from the world decades ago, has come back. As an outreach volunteer, people approach me every day saying, look, I have cancer and I need blood transfusion. Or those who have kidney problems and need a specific procedure. The procedures are not offered at the camp, nor are they capable of paying for them. I know a lot of people who needed a few simple procedures, but because of a lack of funds and the authorities' inability to pay, unfortunately they passed away.
So a couple of things that are happening here, as you're hearing some of the stories about what it's like on the ground. I want to show you a couple of things that we pulled together as a team. So have a look back here on my laptop. This was for this year, how many times that Syria and Assad have been tweeted out. So we're looking at about 22 million mentions, about 63,000 tweets in a day. Okay, so let's look at what's happening with ISIL or ISIS. So this is not even the whole of the year. We're starting in about May through to the end of the year. Look how the mentions of ISIL and ISIS have peaked from May to the end of this year. 32 million mentions and tweets, about 92,000 tweets a day. Omar, this is something, I know, wow, indeed. It kind of struck us once we started to add up the figures there. This was something that also struck our online community, Omar, right?
It did. We asked whether that could have an impact on the humanitarian situation, and people certainly thought it did. Malik tweeted in saying, most certainly it would, leads to all Muslims being painted with one brush, and in the end just dehumanizes the Syrians who need help the most. Goes on to say, make sure Western paranoia doesn't affect those genuine NGOs in the field who have been blacklisted as having terrorist ties. Hazami, from your experience with ISIS being in the news, has there been more fear among donors to actually give specifically because of this?
I definitely think so. So the approach of my work is looking more at the public affairs angle. So it's more at the intersection of business, sustainable development, large-scale donations, and even more recently trying to leverage celebrity power to endorse and get behind causes that help humanize this very plight of Syrians that oftentimes becomes fluff, stories in the sense of, oh great, this poor Syrian person, and then it cycles out of the news. I think one of the important things that you mentioned with the ISIS narrative is it's not just a war that's happening on the ground, there's a digital war happening. There's also a war of narratives that is occurring. When you look at ISIS and how much they spend annually and also by the month on PR and marketing, it completely dwarfs.
How do you even gauge how much they spend? You guessing?
No, so there's a lot of research that's been done on how much money is being spent, specifically on recruitment, on campaigning, in addition to kind of PR videos that are coming out. While all the humanitarian interventions are very great, they do become very sadly fluff, as you very much showed. The conversations are heavily dominated with political discourse and religious discourse increasingly, which no matter how much is happening on the ground, when it comes down to large-scale donations, corporate funding, sustainable impact, you are having a lot of fear for the big dollar donations that are not necessarily.
What are people telling you? Because you're basically trying to get money out of people. What are they saying?
Trying to get money and design programs. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty. I think that we must, as someone who works actively with Syrian American organizations, there's also a very fragmented approach within the Syrian American response. There's a lot of different organizations that are all doing very repetitive programming to one another, and so when you have a major donor that wants to identify an entity or a program to fund, there tends to be a little bit of confusion as to which organization is trustworthy of the 15 or 16 that are ultimately very much attempting to do very similar programs. So I feel like the responses that are happening need to be better collaborated and better strategized, but then there needs to be stronger narratives that are well-funded narratives that can inject.
Like what? What would be the narrative that you said, okay, let's go with this, this is going to really help? Because come January, the World Food Programme, where's their money going to come from?
Exactly. I think that we need to rely more on public affairs campaigns, and I've find that to be very productive when looking at kind of public affairs campaigns that do serve to be
so I'm looking at
beneficial.
Sammy right now, sitting there at Zatari. How's a public affair campaign going to help Sammy?
So, for example, Mercy Corps is one of the very organizations that does actually do this relatively successfully.
Okay.
Mercy Corps is really good at connecting to larger scale initiatives and to corporations and thinking about how do you leverage different international stakeholders to fund programs that are happening in Mercy Corps. So I went to one of the camps, for example, and it looked at using young boys. It was looking at frustrated young boys that were the risk gap of boys, and it worked with them on creating kind of physical exercises that aim to channel their frustrations into something constructive and positive. And that was a really strong sell to the international community, because you have something that's not just looking at short-term crisis management, but it's looking at rehabilitation. It's looking at how do you then leverage the international community to do something that we all have in common, which is a desire for a kind of a more healthy and productive future in life.
Okay, Melissa, I'm just thinking here about the World Food Programme literally running out of money for Syria. How does that happen?
It happens when there are commitments made and they're not followed through on. I mean, it happens when the needs continue to grow and grow, and the donors can't or won't step up to the plate. I have to say, though, donors have been more generous than they ever have been. It's an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. We have not experienced anything like it in the past couple of decades. So
it's bigger
what we're trying to do, and it's true what our colleague just said, we need to find new ways to bring in new donors, new sources of funding, because it's just drying up. So we're pleased that actually we're getting funders from the Gulf. This is a very new phenomenon. Otherwise, we're going to be facing a situation, and I'm sorry, because for me, what kills me is not just, I mean, it's the basics. We should be able to be providing food and shelter. I mean, this is just 101. But what Sami is talking about is really, really important. We have a society, Syria, that was a highly educated society. It was a populate, with people who were on their way to education in his age, and on their way to university, and their lives have been broken off, and now they're sitting and languishing In the Zatri refugee camp and in other camps, people, and look at how he's speaking English. I mean, to every one of you, this guy is an educated guy, and he is not able to go to university. There is something wrong with this picture. There's really something wrong, even if it's just in the strategic self-interest of countries to say, let's provide education for the kids. That's my point here.
I'm afraid the whole world got used to our situation, my friend.
Yeah, and Sammy, remind me what you were going to train to be, because I remember something happened to you, and then you had to go straight to Zatari. Were you training to be? Remind me what you were planning to be.
I wanted to be a pilot.
That's it. I told my colleagues. Isn't that Sammy who wanted to be a pilot? Okay. Yes.
Exactly,
amazing.
yeah.
I just want to say something, if I can, real quick. I think when you look at what Melissa was mentioning, and you look at the public affairs side, so a lot of commitments have been made by countries, including the Gulf, a lot of which has not actually come to fruition. Right. So a lot of commitments and promises were made. There was a recent survey that just happened online. It was asking people around the world to start putting pressure on the EU for the $45 million that did not actually come through from the commitment. And so that's how PR and public engagement can also help mobilize and push governments who have made commitments, like the Kuwaiti government, the Saudi government, that we have not seen.
Hassami, let me engage with our online community, otherwise they'll be very upset with me. Omar, go ahead.
We have Mr. Will Bill who tweeted in saying, I just have to wonder if anyone bothered to ask the Syrians what they want and need. Lena, I know you work in this field. Have you ever come across any confusion about what Syrians actually need and what's actually being delivered to them?
Absolutely. We encounter that all the time. And I think that's the intersection between what Hazami is saying and what Melissa is saying. People do not, the large international aid organizations, with all due respect to them, do not have the ability to work on the ground directly with Syrians because of what the UN Security Council's resolutions have failed to pass to do cross-border aid and really get onto the ground. And this is the regime's fault and the UN Security Council's fault and the international community at large. But we have seen many cases of Syrians crossing the border to meet with us. We are a small NGO, and they will tell us, this area doesn't want food baskets, this area needs vaccines, this area is trying to rebuild schools. And we're very small, but we make sure that we give people exactly what they want, and the needs change. The needs change as the time passes, and the needs change based on the time of year that we're working on. And that's something that we hope that the larger organizations like Mercy Corps or UNHCR, any large organization, can start listening to what the Syrians' needs are and begin responding to that. And the other big question, which I know that Sammy knows that this is the crux of the situation, is that we keep on as a community looking at the symptoms and trying to solve the symptoms of the problem, which is 9 million displaced Syrians and 12 million Syrians in need, and nobody's talking about ending the source. And we know what the source is, and refugees need to go back home, and they need to go back to their cities inside Syria and start rebuilding a nation. And we all know that the source is not ISIS, the source is the Assad regime.
So we have people actually who disagree on precisely that point of where the future is for Syrian refugees. We have Big Lysis here who tweets in saying the focus should be on resolving the problem in Syria. On the other hand, you have Neslihan who tweeted in saying it seems nearly impossible to rebuild Syria, so what are the alternatives for Syrian refugees? Hazami, is it time to look at possible alternatives? Are some of these refugees just never going to go home and it's time to try to resettle them in different countries? Is that something to look at all?
I think we need to focus on thinking about what does happen to people that are in that no man's land. I recently went to a trip to Zatari, and you do feel a lot of that stress where people, do you go into Jordan? Do you stay in the camp? What do you do? How do you ultimately create a life for yourself? I think the international...
you also had a young refugee staying with you, right?
I did.
Tell us about that situation.
So someone who initially was here on an international program and then became a dear friend and moved in to live with me. And that was one of the exact things that we discussed oftentimes, was how do you create and provide resources to young refugees, like the young lady that I encountered, and help her think about how to make most of the resources in the community in which she lives.
But for me, I think the thing that kind of came home to me was that she wasn't ready to give up on Syria. She was thinking, I'm going to go back to Syria. I'm not going to do anything until I go back.
And most people do. And I think the big thing that the international aid community can do at an individual level, an individual capacity, which I know Lina works a lot on, is mobilizing people to be mentors to these young people, to help them take advantage of resources in the communities where they are, and to think about how they can then leverage these talents and these experiences to then rebuild their country, and using that time to really learn what it would take to rebuild, get involved in local programs, increase and strengthen your English so that you can mobilize international aid more effectively.
So you've got to be thinking beyond maybe just staying around Syria. You've got to be thinking about what do you do next?
And there's a lot of these great scholarships that are now coming to fruition. I think a lot of young Syrians simply don't know how to access these resources.
All right, let me check back in with Melissa. Melissa, are you just concerned about trying to feed people come January, or are you also thinking, hang on a minute, maybe we have to resettle a lot of Syrians? Maybe that is the way forward.
It's a menu of everything, because we're about to go to Berlin on Thursday to a major conference, appealing for probably the largest sum of money that the UN has ever appealed for a crisis situation in a particular region or country or refugee situation. This will be on Thursday. And what we're doing that is different this time is that we're not just appealing for humanitarian response, but we're also partnering with the UN Development Program and appealing for massive investment in the countries, the infrastructure of the countries of Lebanon, of Jordan, of Turkey, of Egypt, of Iraq, who are so generously hosting so many refugees in proportions that is just unimaginable for European countries or other countries. Please invest in those communities, and I've visited many. I've been to towns and villages in Lebanon that have more Syrian refugees than local citizens.
Wow.
And they are at breaking point. So we're hoping for a major influx of cash, but in addition, we are appealing to the richer countries of the world, please share the burden. These countries cannot go on. We're concerned that the asylum space, as we call it in our UNHCR jargon, for Syrian refugees will be exhausted soon. Can these countries continue to accept refugees? And borders are being closely managed now. Fewer and fewer are able to come over. Please alleviate the burden and resettle large numbers of really vulnerable refugees, and open your borders for Syrian refugees who decide that they really would prefer to seek safety and asylum in Europe.
All right, Melissa, let me just go back to Abdul Razak Harari. You may remember that he is the refugee, another refugee who's in the Zatari camp. He spoke to us just a little while ago. This is what he said about when the aid gets cut. This is what happens to the refugees in this particular camp.
يعني حتى بالقرارات الأخيرة تبعت الأمم المتحدة تبع قطع المساعدة.
The recent UN decisions to cut aid have forced parents to make the tough decision of returning to Syria. What else are they supposed to do? If they cannot provide their children with something to eat so they can survive, many of them say they would simply rather go die in their home country. The problem is the international civil society does not know what we are going through.
All right, so this is one refugee story. We've got Sami Oudous, who's going to be coming to our post show with us at stream.aljazeera.com. You can hear more about his story. What are you hearing online, Omar?
There's a competition between optimism and pessimism. We have Lieutenant Colonel Gurmit, who tweets in saying, Syria is now a stale news. Let it resolve itself. At this rate, there will be no Syria. On the other hand, there is Mustafa here, who's much more hopeful, saying, I'm optimistic that displaced Syrians will one day be the agents of reconciliation to this conflict. Let's hope that much is true.
Oh my goodness. So Sami, what does your gut tell you about what's going to happen next? You've been sitting in Zatari for 2 years now. Just give us an ending thought.
I totally have no idea, to be honest. I really have no idea.
Sure.
I'm wishing and I'm hoping that, people would help us, at the moment, like to live here in the camp or whatever camps in the world.
Right. All right, waiting and hoping. Sami Oudous there, Lina Sergi, Melissa Fleming and Hazami Bamada all coming to the post show. You can hear they have a lot more to talk about. Stream.aljazeera.com. We will see you there, hopefully. Let me tell you about the next AJ Stream. Irish protesters are flooding the streets as anger over islands and water charges reaches boiling point. That debate on the next AJ Stream. In the meantime, we'll talk about humanitarian help for Syria at the post show. See you there. Hello, this is the Stream's online post show. We've been talking about the challenge of securing resources for the 12 million plus Syrian refugees in need of humanitarian assistance. So just as I was wrapping up the show, Lina, I know you were about to say something and I had to stop because we were bumping into the news. What were you about to say?
I wanted to say a couple of things. One of the things that I wanted to say was that as Karam Foundation, we've always been interested in innovative ways of giving and technologically advanced ways of giving. And we were very much inspired by Melissa Fleming's TED Talk about helping refugees thrive and not just survive. So that's really at the basis of our work and what we do with the kids, the refugee kids on the Syrian-Turkish border. I wanted to say that last week there was a huge campaign in the United States called Hour of Code. And they were just trying to introduce the concept of how important it is for American children to learn how to code. Well, 2 weeks ago at our Karam Leadership Program for Syrian refugee teens, all of our 10th graders took a 20-hour coding session with educators from Lebanon who came and taught them how to code, and they earned a certificate, and we built them a computer lab, and they're basically being exposed to the same ideas that kids around the world are being exposed to, and being exposed to the idea that you can build your own life. And you can have, with an internet connection, really the sky is the limit, and you can learn how to become an entrepreneur and build a company and become a success, and you don't have to be a burden on the community that you're a refugee at. And the other thing I wanted to say was directly to Sami, is that we would love, as Karam Foundation, to be connected with him and see if we could help him with a scholarship or with any endeavor that he would like to do in the future.
Oh my goodness, Sami, did you hear that? There's one thing if this show could do, if we could get Sami out of Zatari camp, that would be that would be amazing.
Obviously, there's no promises when it comes to Syria because there's so many red lines, but
Lina, but you said it on Al Jazeera, right? You've got to deliver.
No, we have to deliver.
Sami and all of Sami's family, basically. We're hustling for you, Sami.
Please connect us. Please connect us after the show, and we would love to see how we can help you.
I would do that myself. Oh my goodness, that would be so great. Okay, one at a time, baby steps. Omar.
So precisely on this point of helping refugees not just survive, but actually be integrated, we have people tweeting in about this. Abbas just tweeted in saying integrating refugees in the host country will reduce overdependence on humanitarian aid. And then we have this video comment from Ramiar. Take a listen to this.
The point is not only rice and beans. Those people need a new life. Their country has been destroyed, so there is no planning to integrate them in the neighboring countries, and they've been forced to process anyway illegally into Europe, and underway and inside Europe they face the other kind of difficulties like I've seen in Greece. Unaccompanied minors have been imprisoned on charge of smuggling based on no evidence but the witnessing of the Coast Guards.
Melissa, is this something that you think would be end up being a crucial part of actually looking after Syrian refugees? Is that not just helping them basically survive or find host countries to take them in, but actually look through the whole process of integrating them into those societies?
Well, for UNHCR, local integration is a key factor, and there's lots of evidence that refugees are incredible contributors to societies. The people who are fleeing represent all fabrics of societies. They're doctors, lawyers, architects, teachers. So absolutely, refugees should be able to contribute to communities if, to the extent that they can take them in. The problem is the vast majority of refugees in the world, and it's the same case with Syrian refugees, are living in countries that are struggling with their own problems. Problems with the insecurity from the war next door, and also, as in the case of Lebanon, with sectarian issues, with insecurity. So it's not as simple and straightforward as that. Absolutely. The more we can integrate refugees, the better. We're all for it. The more richer countries who actually need expertise, and could use the refugee help. Absolutely, let's offer refugees opportunity, work visas, student visas, so that they don't have to risk their lives on dangerous journeys just to reach Europe and die in the Mediterranean. So we're looking at all kinds of possibilities for solutions for refugees as this conflict drags on and on. and the possibilities for return are just becoming more and more distant.
Melissa, we were just fixing a little audio issue your end, so you missed a fantastic compliment that Lena paid you. Lena, do you want to redo that compliment so Melissa can respond to it? Do you remember?
Yes,
go ahead.
I just wanted to say to Melissa that we were very much inspired, myself individually and as an organization, by your TED Talk and about your message of helping refugees thrive and not just survive. And that's what we hope to do every day in our work with Syrian refugees and Syrian families. So please, we really thank you for your inspiring talk.
Thank you so much, and I'm very inspired by your work and your foundation.
Melissa, how do you call people out? Do you use the carrot or the stick?
Oh, mostly the carrot.
Yeah, because you need the money right at the end. You can't totally call them out.
Absolutely, and I have to say, the generosity of donors has been unprecedented. It's just, frankly, that nobody expected the needs to be this vast. And Syria, unfortunately, is not the only crisis in this world. We're dealing with South Sudan, we're dealing with the Central African Republic, the Ebola crisis. This is depleting the funding that every state does their budget at the beginning of the year, and they say this much goes to humanitarian needs.
Right.
Okay, this much goes to arms. Maybe we should rethink the needs if the wars are not being solved and humanitarian budgets are underfunded and people are having to starve just because they had to flee for their lives as innocent civilians. Something has to be fixed.
Sure.
So yes, we do diplomacy. Others can do naming and shaming, but in any case.
So Melissa's like, shut up, Femi, next question.
Yeah.
I had to go there, sorry. Omar.
So, a lot of people have this frustration about the political situation being stagnant, and then what's the point of giving money? You have Natalie who tweeted in saying, the UN, which has permanently failed to politically stop the conflict in Syria, is now appealing for donations, calling this controversial, can sense the frustration. And you have Abayumi here who tweeted in saying, the cost of aid exceeds the cost of creating a no-fly zone within Syria. If the US and Russia alone can do this, as if you can actually get the US and Russia to work on anything together when it comes to Syria.
Are you editorializing?
Yeah. Just a little bit.
I think you should walk that back, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's so really the question is, do you need to message that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for people to be willing to give? Hazami, is this part of what you do? Can you really get people to continue giving money without really presenting them with any kind of progress on a political front that there is an end to?
I think very sadly, and we partnered recently with UNHCR to do an event on the National Mall, which brought a massive canvas painted in Zaatari to Washington. And when people said to us, what is the point of bringing a 1,760-foot art canvas? Well, it provided a link of humanity between a lot of people, a lot of whom had never even seen a UNHCR tent and didn't even know what UNHCR is. And this was during the Marine Corps Marathon right here in Washington, D.C. And
how
we're
is that
considered
not
educated.
possible in D.C. of all places?
Out of all
to know
places.
What UNHCR
and they had no
means.
clue what they were doing. And I think there's a lot of miscommunication around what is actually happening. And the longer this...
Melissa's kind of doing a mental face palm right now.
Well, the longer this stretches out, I think the longer this stretches out, the more people are losing hope. And we need to be able to highlight narratives that do give people bite sizes of hope, but also putting into perspective the larger needs. When we oversimplify the equation and we say, oh great, one kid has a blanket, you're also, to a lot of the donor community, frustrating them to say, well great, a blanket is not going to provide education and housing and healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think the constructive avenue forward is being able to provide larger narratives that allow people to know why current crisis aid is needed, but also why long-term strategic aid is also needed. And there needs to be those small stories that do showcase success while also showing why urgency, there is a sense of urgency despite the fact that there is no long-term solution in a lot of people's near horizon.
I wanted to jump in here and just say that a couple weeks ago for Giving Tuesday on December 3rd, we ran an online campaign for winterization packages for Syrians, and we had a group of about 50 Syrian American youth across the country who campaigned for about 3 or 4 days, and we were able to raise over $160,000 from donors across the world, and the majority of the donations were in the $10 to $20 range of people people who just wanted to give winter packages for Syrian children. So I think that Hazami is right. When you frame the story in an easy way, and a way that really shows the humanity of the Syrian people and what they've been going through, they really do step up to the plate and start donating. So we just have to keep doing that and appealing to more people, and having people understand that these people are just like us, and they are in this situation not because of a natural disaster. This is a conflict zone, it's a war zone, and 99% of the people are stuck in the middle, and we as a community, as human beings, owe the Syrian people all of our compassion and our support.
Melissa, people are watching this program and they want to help. What should they do?
Well, I mean, I think it depends. You know, if you can rally your governments to continue to support humanitarian action around Syria. How about asking or starting a movement to stop the war, to get those people who have the influence to put an end to it? Nobody's winning this war in Syria, and it's just creating tremendous suffering. Also, you know, if you have if you're in Europe, if you're in the US and there are Syrians who are now arriving in your towns and cities. I think what refugees need most is to reach out a hand of friendship, and just try to help them. Yes, same to you and Zatri. A hand of friendship. That's human beings, and they're like you and I. I realize every day when I see how wars pop up suddenly. It could be any one of us, and let's do what we can. One little thing will make a big difference.
Sure. And Sami, I mean, you've been in Zatari for 2 years now. How's your frame of mind changed from when you got there till today? What's different for you now?
When I first came, I thought that I'm going to be back to Syria in 3 or 4 months at the most. And I was just eating every day, drinking every day, just for the day I would get back. But now I'm looking for the day to leave from here and start a new life. I'm not thinking about Syria anymore because I don't know, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Sami Aldous, he's in the Zatari camp, refugee camp in Jordan. You also heard from Lena Sergi, Melissa Fleming and Hazami Bamada. Thank you very much for giving us this insight into what is happening for the humanitarian situation on the ground in Syria and the surrounding refugee camps. Omar, what's the last thing you want to leave us with?
We have Swim Little Fish, who says, I think and hope that governments will stop being able to leave this up to NGOs and to UN agencies. She wants to see more from governments.
And we will continue this online. I know some of our guests have suggestions as to how you can help. So hashtag AJStream, continue the conversation there. Meanwhile, on our next show, Irish protesters are flooding the streets as anger over Ireland's water charges reaches boiling point. That debate on the next AJ Stream. See you soon.